Once an ancient king named Yudhishthira was asked an interesting question. What is the most wonderful thing in this world? The king replied, every day hundreds and thousands of living entities die in this world, and yet those who are remaining think they will live forever. This, the king said, is the most wonderful thing in this world. When we look at the world around us, we see a common cycle of events happen. Every living being is born at a certain time, lives for some time, and dies at some point in time. Even though death is so inevitable for everyone, we know very little about what actually happens at the time of death. Let's turn to the pages of the yoga texts to know more about this very important event in our life. All experiences that we go through in our lives create a mental impression in our memory. These experiences can range from simple happenings to the most intense emotional and spiritual events. Everything gets registered as an impression. These impressions influence our thoughts to a great extent throughout our lives. Conversely, the more we meditate on these thoughts, the more deeper the corresponding impressions go into our memory. Thus, the thoughts and impressions feed on each other. At the time of death, all the impressions we have accumulated throughout our lives bring back their corresponding thoughts. Good impressions bring good thoughts at the time of death. Bad impressions bring bad thoughts at the time of death. And spiritual impressions bring spiritual thoughts at the time of death. The ancient yoga text called the Bhagavad Gita explains that whatever thought one has at the time of death, one will attain a body matching that thought in his next life. For example, if one thinks of a fish at the time of death, one might take the body of a fish in his next life. Or let's say if one thinks of his home at the time of death, he might take the body of a mouse in the same home in his next life. The Gita says, if one thinks of Krishna at the time of death, one immediately breaks away from the cycle of birth and death and goes to the spiritual world to enjoy an eternal, blissful life. Thus, it's the thoughts that decide where the soul goes upon leaving the current body. Material thoughts bind the soul to this world, and spiritual thoughts free the soul. Since the thoughts at the final moment influence our next life, the yoga texts recommend that one practice mantra meditation and cultivate spiritual thoughts about Krishna throughout one's life. That way, we'll be able to replace all our material thoughts with spiritual thoughts and impressions. Thus, by adopting a spiritual lifestyle and chanting the name of Krishna, one will not only be happy in this life,